Your brain runs a 90-minute repair cycle every night, and most people waste all 5 of them. Neuroscientists call the 20-minute window before sleep the hypnagogic corridor. It is a state where your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that filters what is possible for you, goes partially offline. What you feed your mind in those 20 minutes does not just influence your dreams. It rewrites the operating code your subconscious runs on every waking hour. This is not a metaphor. EEG studies measuring theta wave activity show the brain in a pre-sleep state processes suggestion at a rate 4 to 7 times faster than during full waking consciousness. Tonight, that corridor opens again. The question is, what walks through it? By the time we reach part 3, you will understand the one cognitive mistake that turns your pre-sleep state into a trap rather than a tool, and why fixing it takes less than 4 minutes. Before we go further, let me tell you exactly what this program is and what it is not. This is not a collection of sleep tips. This is not a relaxation guide. What you are about to receive is a structured method for reprogramming 3 specific default thought loops that your brain runs on autopilot every night without your permission. Those loops shape your emotional baseline, your decision-making, your relationships, and your physical recovery. And they are running right now, whether you are aware of them or not. Every mechanism in this program is grounded in a named process. Every claim is tied to a specific study, a specific researcher, or a specific physiological function. If something sounds like it belongs in a self-help book from 1997, I will give you the mechanism underneath it until it sounds like what it actually is. Neuroscience applied to the 20 minutes before you close your eyes. Before we finish tonight, I will tell you what happened to a 41-year-old logistics manager named David when he did this for 11 consecutive nights. The result was not what he expected, and it was not what I would have predicted either. That story is coming. But first, we need to build the foundation it stands on, because without the foundation, the story is just a story. With it, it becomes a map. Part OE, The Arsight Card OF The Night Mind. Chapter 1, The 20-minute Window UDO Not Know You Have. Picture Sarah. She is 38 years old, works as an accountant, and every night she lies in bed doing something she is completely unaware of. The moment her head touches the pillow, her brain begins running a mental audit of the day. Not an intentional audit, not a chosen one, an automatic one. She replays the meeting where she said the wrong thing. She reruns the email she sent and wonders if the tone came across wrong. She thinks about the report that is not finished. She thinks about the client who seemed irritated on the call. She cycles back to the meeting. She cycles back to the email. By the time her body finally gives out and pulls her under into sleep, she has rehearsed her 3 biggest anxieties approximately 40 times each. Her brain does not experience this as worry. Her brain experiences this as instruction, as rehearsal, as repetition. And the brain, more than almost anything else, responds to repetition. Here is what is happening beneath the surface of Sarah's experience. In the minutes before sleep, your brain transitions through distinct electrical states. Full waking consciousness is characterized by beta waves, which run at roughly 13 to 30 cycles per second. As you relax, beta gives way to alpha at 8 to 12 cycles per second. And then, in the window, just before sleep takes hold, alpha gives way to theta, running at 4 to 8 cycles per second. This theta state is what researchers and clinicians call the hypnagogic state. It is the border zone between waking and sleeping, and it has properties that make it unlike any other state your brain enters. In the theta state, your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for critical evaluation, logical filtering, and what we might call the voice that says that is not realistic, begins to go offline. Not completely, but enough. The result is that your associative processing, the brain's ability to form connections between concepts without evaluating whether those connections are rational, becomes dramatically heightened. You become, in a measurable neurological sense, more suggestible. Not in the theatrical sense of stage hypnosis, in the biological sense of being more open to encoding new patterns. This is not mysticism. This is the same state deliberately used in clinical hypnotherapy, in biofeedback protocols, and in certain types of high-performance athletic training. It is a specific, documented, measurable window. Thomas Edison understood something about this window before anyone had the vocabulary to explain it. Edison was famous for sleeping very little at night but napping frequently during the day. What historians have documented is more specific than that. He would sit in a chair holding steel balls over a metal plate on the floor. As he drifted towards sleep, his hand would relax, the balls would drop onto the plate with a loud clatter, and he would wake up. He was doing this deliberately. He was hunting the threshold. He wanted the ideas that appeared in the transition, not the ideas that appeared in full waking thought. 3 of his most cited sudden invention breakthroughs, including work that led to developments in both sound recording and the electrical distribution system, were documented as appearing in this window. He was not lucky. He was systematic. He was working the corridor. The point here is not that Edison was unusual. The point is that the corridor he was working is the same corridor that opens for you every single night, whether you are working it or not. The difference between Edison napping in a chair with steel balls and Sarah lying in bed running her anxiety audit is not intelligence or discipline or even intention. It is direction. He was pointing the corridor towards something. She is letting the corridor run whatever loaded itself by default. Here is your first action. Tonight, set a timer for 22 minutes before your target sleep time. Not your actual sleep time, your target. The time you intend to be asleep, minus 22 minutes. That 22-minute window is your corridor. Everything in this program happens inside that window. What you do in those 22 minutes is what this entire program is about. But here is the problem with simply telling yourself to think positive things in those 22 minutes. And it is a problem most programs never mention, because addressing it honestly requires understanding something uncomfortable about how your own brain filters reality. Chapter 2. WHY, your brain, regixat, utel, itto, believe. Let us pick up exactly where we left off. You now know the corridor exists. You know it opens every night. You know that what enters it gets encoded more deeply than what enters your conscious mind during the day. So the obvious move is to walk into that corridor and start feeding your brain better content. Positive thoughts, affirming beliefs, forward-looking ideas. Except there is a problem. And the problem is not that you are not trying hard enough. The problem is biological. In 2012, a study published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology examined what happens when people with low self-esteem are instructed to repeat positive self-statements. Direct self-instruction. The kind of thing that has appeared in personal development content for decades. Phrases like, I am confident, I am capable, I am worthy of success. The results were not neutral. They were actively counterproductive. Subjects with low self-esteem who were told to repeat these statements showed measurable cortisol spikes, not cortisol reductions. Their stress response activated. They did not feel calmer. They felt worse. And the mechanism behind this is not complicated once you understand it. When your prefrontal cortex is online, it does not just evaluate external reality. It evaluates your internal statements too. When you say, I am confident, and your brain still has its critical filter running, the filter does a credibility check. It searches for evidence. It finds the last 10 times you did not feel confident. It flags the statement as inconsistent with available data. And because cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding 2 contradictory beliefs simultaneously, is actually a biological signal the brain is designed to resolve, the brain resolves it in the direction of the existing belief. The existing belief wins. The new statement loses. And you feel worse than before you started, because now you have reminded yourself of the gap between where you are and where you are trying to be. This is not a character flaw. This is not a lack of willpower. This is your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. Meet Marco. Marco is 29 years old and works as a freelance graphic designer. For 6 months, Marco did affirmations every night before bed. He read about them online. He picked specific ones related to his confidence in his creative work and his ability to attract clients. He wrote them in a journal. He said them out loud in front of a mirror. He recorded himself saying them and played them back. And after 6 months of this, he was more anxious than when he started. When Marco eventually talked to a therapist about this, the therapist asked him one question. What time were you doing the affirmations? Marco said, before bed, usually around 10 p.m. His target sleep time was around 11, so he was doing his affirmation work 60 minutes before his corridor, not inside it. He was doing them while his prefrontal cortex was still fully online, still running the credibility filter, still checking every statement against available evidence and finding it wanting. He was not reprogramming anything. He was having an argument with himself every night for 6 months. Now here is the distinction that changes everything. Memory is not one thing. The brain encodes two fundamentally different categories of information in two fundamentally different ways. Declarative memory is the memory of facts and events. It is the memory you can consciously retrieve and state. I know that Paris is the capital of France. I know that my mother's birthday is in September. This is declarative memory, and it is the type that responds to direct instruction. Procedural memory is different. Procedural memory is the memory of how to walk, how to ride a bike, how to read a face for emotional tone, how to navigate a social situation. Procedural memory does not respond to direct instruction. You cannot tell yourself how to ride a bike and suddenly be able to ride a bike. You can only build procedural memory through repetition in a specific state. And the state that is most receptive to procedural encoding is not waking analytical consciousness. It is the theta state. When you do affirmations while you are fully awake, you are targeting declarative memory. The critical filter runs. The credibility check fails. The new belief does not install. When you enter the hypnagogic corridor and deliver the right kind of input in the right kind of way, you are bypassing declarative memory entirely and writing directly to procedural encoding. The same system that knows how to ride a bike. The same system that recognizes faces. The part of your brain that does not ask whether something is true. It just runs. That is why the timing matters more than the content. That is why Marco's 6 months of effort produced anxiety instead of confidence. He had the right ingredients but the wrong window. Here is your assignment for the next 3 nights. Do not change anything yet. Do not try to feed your brain better content in the corridor. Just observe. Each morning, write 1 sentence. The last thing I was thinking about before sleep was blank. 1 sentence. That is it. Keep it next to your bed. Do not analyze it. Do not judge it. Just record it. This diagnostic alone, the act of making visible what is currently invisible, changes everything that comes next. You will understand why by the time we reach chapter 7. And this, by the way, is exactly the trap David was caught in before everything shifted. The moment he understood why it was not working, the whole architecture changed. That story is coming in part 2. But first, we need to identify the specific default programs that are running without your permission. Chapter 3. THE4, Default Programs, Running, Wunning, Without Your Permission. Every brain, during the transition towards sleep, activates a network of regions that neuroscientists call the default mode network. This is not a metaphor. It is a documented neural circuit that switches on when the brain is not focused on an external task. During rest prep, during the minutes before sleep, the default mode network activates reliably across subjects. Researchers at Washington University, mapping the cognitive content of pre-sleep default mode activity, identified 4 recurring loop patterns that appear in 87% of subjects during this window. They are not random. They are not unique to anxious people or unhappy people or unsuccessful people. They are default patterns. They are what the brain runs when it has not been given explicit direction. And one of them is almost certainly yours. Here are the 4 loops. The first is the inventory loop. This is the loop Sarah runs. It is a mental replay of the day's unresolved events, not a neutral replay. A specifically curated replay of what went wrong, what was incomplete, what produced discomfort, and what remains uncertain. The brain is not doing this to punish you. It is doing it because it is trying to process unfinished business. The loop is a cognitive attempt at resolution. Nina is 44 years old and teaches middle school. Every night, without exception, she replays the moment a student said something dismissive in her 3rd period class. She replays the conversation with the vice principal that did not go the way she planned. She replays the lesson that fell flat. By 11 p.m., she has reconstructed the full emotional texture of every moment during the day that felt like failure or friction. She is not a negative person. She is a person running the inventory loop, which the brain has determined is unfinished business requiring review. The second loop is the forecast loop. This is anxiety-based future simulation. The brain is not replaying what happened. It is running projections of what might happen. It is constructing worst-case scenarios, stress testing them, modifying them slightly, and running them again. This is an evolutionary feature, not a flaw. The brain that could simulate threat in advance survived better than the brain that could not. But in the modern context, where the threats are quarterly reviews and difficult conversations rather than predators, the simulation runs continuously and produces chronic cortisol without producing any actual survival benefit. Harold is 52 and owns a small landscaping company. Every Sunday night, he cannot sleep. His brain is running full simulations of Monday. Which client will be unhappy? Which crew member will call in sick? Which invoice has not been paid? He has run these simulations hundreds of times. They have never once produced a creative solution. They have never changed what happens on Monday. They have only consumed 2 to 3 hours of the window that was supposed to regenerate him for the challenges they were simulating. The third loop is the comparison loop. This is involuntary social ranking. The brain is measuring you against perceived peers, and in almost every case, it is selecting the comparisons that produce the most unfavorable results. This is not masochism. Social comparison is a deeply wired navigational tool. Knowing where you stand in relation to others is, from a survival standpoint, useful information. But like the forecast loop, it was designed for a social context that no longer exists. In the environment where it evolved, you were comparing yourself to 30 or 40 people in your immediate community. In the modern environment, you are comparing yourself to a curated highlight reel of thousands. Ruby is 31 and works in creative direction for a small agency. She goes to bed every night, having spent time on social media, and the comparison loop runs automatically from the moment she puts down her phone. Other designers are launching their own studios. Other people, her age, own property. Someone from her college class just got featured in a design publication. She does not choose to think these thoughts. They run. The loop has been loaded. It plays. The fourth loop is the debt loop. This one is the hardest to name because it is the least specific. The debt loop is a diffuse, pervasive sense of being behind. Not behind on a particular task, behind on existence. The subjective feeling that you owe more than you have given, that you should be further along. That time has passed, and the balance sheet is not adding up in your favor. It is less about specific failures and more about a generalized insufficiency. It is the loop that says not enough, which is particularly difficult to address because it does not attach to a particular item. It is atmospheric. It saturates everything. Clara is 27 and in the final year of her graduate program. Her debt loop does not center on her academic performance. She is performing well. It centers on a vague, unnamed sense that she has not done enough with the time she has had, that she should be more, that she is behind a version of herself she never clearly defined and will therefore never clearly satisfy. She cannot name exactly what she has failed to do, but the feeling of having failed to do it is with her every night. These 4 loops are the terrain of the pre-sleep mind. Everything in this program is a response to one or more of these loops specifically. The rest of the night protocols map directly to them. Here is your action for this chapter. Identify your dominant loop. Not all of them. 1. The dominant one. You will know which one it is because it is the one that made you slightly uncomfortable reading it. Not the most intellectually interesting one. The one that landed differently. The one where something in you said yes, that one. Write it down. Give it its label. Inventory loop, forecast loop, comparison loop, or debt loop. Write the label on a piece of paper or the first page of a notebook and put it next to your bed. You will use that label every night going forward as a pattern interrupt. The act of naming a pattern is the first step toward being outside it rather than inside it. Chapter 4. WHESESEPCHI Subconscious Actually Responds to You. Here is the counterintuitive claim at the center of this entire program. And if you only retain one thing from everything we cover tonight, let it be this. The subconscious mind does not respond to words. It responds to somatic states, which is to say, body sensations that words are attached to. This seems simple, but it has radical implications for how you use the pre-sleep corridor. Words alone, even precisely chosen words, even words delivered at exactly the right moment in exactly the right brainwave state, are only half the signal. Maybe less than half. The subconscious speaks in body first, mind second. And this is not a philosophical position. It is the direct implication of neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis, which is one of the most rigorously supported frameworks in modern cognitive science. Damasio's work demonstrated something that overturned decades of assumption about how the brain makes decisions and stores memories. The brain does not store memories as pure information. It stores them tagged with physical sensation data. The felt quality of an experience, the tightening in the chest, the warmth in the face, the looseness in the legs, is encoded alongside the content of the experience and becomes inseparable from it. When you recall a memory, you do not just recall information. You recall a body state, and the body state comes first. The emotional interpretation comes after. What this means for you is this. If you want to encode a new pattern in the pre-sleep corridor, words describing that pattern are not enough. You need to arrive at the corridor in a body state that is compatible with the pattern you want to install. If you want to encode confidence, you cannot just say confidence-related words. You need to inhabit a body state that your nervous system recognizes as confidence. And fortunately, you do not need to manufacture that state from nothing. You need only to recall it. Joey is 47 years old, a former competitive athlete who built and then lost a manufacturing business in his early 40s. After the business failed, he tried everything available to him to rebuild his sense of self and his motivation. He journaled every morning. He read books about resilience. He listened to audio programs about mindset. He tracked his habits. None of it produced more than temporary relief. He described it as putting wallpaper over a damaged wall. Then his therapist introduced him to something different. She asked him to stop trying to generate a new belief and instead recall a specific physical memory. Not a general memory, a specific one. She asked him to remember the moment after a specific high school wrestling match, a match he won in overtime against a competitor he had lost to twice before. She asked him not to remember the win abstractly, but to remember the specific physical sensations, the weight distribution in his legs as he stood on the mat, the expansion in his chest, the temperature of the air, the specific quality of fatigue in his arms that felt different from ordinary tiredness because it was connected to effort that had worked. Joey spent 90 seconds holding that body state, not visualizing success, not telling himself he was capable, just holding the somatic memory of what capability had actually felt like in his body at a specific moment in time. And then his therapist asked him to attach a single word to that state, one word that, when he thought it, would recall the state rather than just describe it. He chose the word solid. That word became his pre-sleep anchor. Every night, before sleep, he would recall the body state, hold it for 90 seconds, say the word solid to himself, and enter the corridor with that state active. His therapist had him track his morning motivation on a simple 1 to 10 scale. Before the anchor practice, he was averaging 3.2. After 14 nights, he was averaging 6.8. He had not changed his financial situation. He had not resolved any of the grief around the business. He had only changed what somatic state he was entering the corridor with, and the corridor had encoded it. This is somatic anchoring. It is the process of pairing a recalled body sensation to a target emotional state. It precedes the verbal layer. It bypasses the credibility filter entirely because the body does not run a credibility filter. The body simply responds to states. A remembered state of confidence feels, to the nervous system, indistinguishable from a current state of confidence. This is the mechanism. This is why it works. Here is your action for tonight. Before you lie down, close your eyes and recall one specific physical moment when you felt genuinely capable. Not a concept, not a category, a moment. A specific, named moment from your actual life. It does not need to be a dramatic moment. It can be small. The moment you finished something difficult, and it was good. The moment you navigated a hard conversation, and it came out better than you expected. The moment you understood something you had been struggling to understand. Now go into that moment at the physical level. Where were you standing or sitting? What was the temperature? What did your chest feel like? What was the weight in your body? What did your hands feel like? Hold those sensations for 90 seconds. Then choose a word that names the state without describing it. Solid, clear, ready, enough. It does not matter which word. What matters is that it is yours. That word is your anchor. Lie down. Carry it with you into the corridor. In the next section, we leave diagnosis behind and move into the night protocols themselves. The protocols are mapped directly to the 4 loops we just named. But before we get there, we need to cover 2 foundational mechanics that make every protocol work, and both of them require understanding something you almost certainly think you already understand. Chapter 5, VHE Breach Ice Not Relaxation, IT Ice A CLC Key. You have almost certainly heard about breathing exercises. You may have tried them: counted breaths, extended exhales, the 4-7-8 method, box breathing. And you probably think of them as relaxation tools, a way to slow down a racing mind, a way to shift out of stress. That understanding is not wrong, but it is incomplete, and the part that is missing is actually the most important part. Controlled breathing is not primarily a relaxation tool. It is a neurological timing mechanism. When you regulate your breathing pattern deliberately, you are not just calming yourself down. You are entraining your brainwave frequency. You are using a mechanical, controllable, physiological input to shift your neural oscillation pattern toward a specific target frequency. In other words, breath is the most accessible tool you have for moving deliberately into the theta state. Here is the mechanism. The vagus nerve, which connects the brainstem to the heart, the lungs, and most of the major organs, is the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. When you extend your exhale relative to your inhale, you stimulate the vagus nerve through the movement of the diaphragm. This produces a cascade of downstream effects. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, cortisol begins to reduce, and critically, your heart rate variability, which is the variation in time between successive heartbeats, begins to increase. HRV is one of the most reliable markers of nervous system flexibility and recovery capacity. Dr. Richard Geverts at Alliant International University has spent decades documenting what he calls the resonance frequency of the human autonomic nervous system. This resonance frequency is the breathing rate at which HRV reaches its maximum, meaning the nervous system is functioning with the greatest possible flexibility. For most adults, that rate falls between 5 and 6 breaths per minute. At this rate, measurable EEG shifts toward lower alpha and upper theta are consistently documented within 4 to 7 minutes of beginning the practice. You are not just calming down, you are moving your brain into the exact frequency range where the corridor opens. Meet Carmela. She is 35, a nurse who works night shifts at a regional hospital. Carmela's problem was one that many night shift workers share. Her cortisol levels, which would normally begin dropping in the evening to facilitate sleep, were dysregulated by her irregular schedule. After a shift, her mind was too active to transition into the corridor naturally. She tried sleep stories, which she found mildly annoying. She tried white noise, which helped marginally. She tried melatonin, which produced grogginess without quality sleep. She had heard of the 4-7-8 breathing method and tried it sporadically, and found it somewhat helpful. But the results were inconsistent. When Carmela started tracking her sleep onset time with a wearable, she noticed a pattern. The nights when the breathing helped were the nights when she did it after she had already put her phone down and her lights were off. The nights when it did not help were the nights when she was still sitting up, often still with some ambient light, sometimes still scrolling briefly between cycles. The difference was not the breath technique. The difference was when, in the sequence, she was applying it. She started treating the breath work as the literal doorway to the corridor, not as a winding down tool she used while still in half-waking mode. Lights off, phone in another room, body still, then the breathing. Starting 22 minutes before her target sleep time. Over 3 weeks of tracking, her average sleep onset time dropped from 41 minutes to 17 minutes. The breath work had not changed. The sequencing had changed. The protocol I want you to use is what I am calling the clock breath. Here's exactly how it runs. 4 counts in through your nose, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out through your mouth. Repeat this 4 times minimum. That is 1 cycle. 4 complete repetitions. This takes approximately 4 minutes. And it is not optional. It is not one option among several. It is the prerequisite for everything else in this program. Think of it this way. If the hypnagogic corridor is the field where reprogramming happens, the clock breath is what opens the gate to that field. Without it, you are not inside the corridor. You are standing outside it, trying to shout through the fence. Your action for tonight: run 4 clock breath cycles as the first thing you do after lights out, phone off, body still. Not before you turn out the light. After. Let the darkness and stillness be part of the signal. Your nervous system is a pattern recognition machine. The more consistently you pair the clock breath with the right environmental cues, the faster it will begin to work. By the end of week 2, most people find that the first count in through the nose begins to trigger the shift before they even reach the 4-cycle completion. The nervous system learns the signal. The corridor begins to open on cue. But there is one more physical variable we need to address before you enter the corridor, and it is one that almost no one in this space mentions at all, because it sounds too simple to matter. It does not just matter. It may be the variable that is quietly undermining everything else you try. Chapter 6, VHE Bodhi Pasien That Change WH Hat Juat You Dream. In 2012, a research team at Hong Kong's Shuyan University published findings from a sleep study that examined the relationship between body position during sleep and the emotional content of dreams. The results were specific enough to be useful. Subjects who slept face down, in the prone position, reported significantly higher rates of threatening dream content, including dreams involving persecution, being tied down, restriction of movement, and being unable to breathe. Left-side sleepers showed an increase in nightmare frequency across several cohorts in the data. Why does this matter for this program? Because the pre-sleep corridor does not end the moment you lose consciousness. It transitions into the early stages of sleep, and the emotional atmosphere of that transition is carried into dream processing, which is one of the primary ways your brain consolidates the inputs from the corridor. If your default sleep position creates a body environment that generates threatening dream content, you are undermining the pre-sleep work the moment your body settles into its default orientation. You can run the perfect protocol in the corridor and then spend the next 90 minutes processing emotional threat material simply because of how your skeleton is arranged against the mattress. Walter is 58 years old and worked as a contractor for 30 years before retiring. Walter had slept on his left side for as long as he could remember. He also had chronic nightmares, which he had always attributed to a stressful career and a difficult divorce in his 40s. He dismissed the nightmares as a byproduct of his life history, not something that could be changed by anything as trivial as which way he faced when he slept. He ended up in a sleep study at a university clinic, partly because his doctor was concerned about his sleep quality, and partly because he was curious. As part of the study, subjects were asked to sleep in different positions on different nights and to record their dream content each morning. When Walter slept on his right side, his nightmare frequency dropped by roughly 60% over 6 weeks. He had not changed his diet. He had not changed his medication. He had not gone to therapy during that period. He had not reduced any identifiable source of stress. He had changed the orientation of his body. He was skeptical enough about this that he switched back to his left side for 2 weeks. The nightmares returned. He switched back to his right side. They diminished again. He is now a right side sleeper. The recommendation for this program is this: make right side or back sleeping your default orientation for the pre-sleep practice and maintain it as your entry position into sleep. You do not need to stay that way all night. Your body will reposition naturally. You need only to begin in the right orientation. Specifics matter here. For right side sleeping, a pillow between the knees reduces lumbar strain, which matters because body discomfort is one of the most reliable attention stealers during the pre-sleep window. Any sustained physical discomfort will pull your attention away from the corridor and toward the body's complaint. You cannot run a somatic anchor practice effectively when your lower back is negotiating with your mattress. Here is the full position prescription for this program. After your clock breath cycles, settle deliberately into right side position. Let your knees be slightly bent with a pillow between them if needed. Then place one hand over your sternum, not your stomach, your sternum, which is the center of your chest, the flat bone that your ribs connect to. This hand position keeps your interoceptive signal stronger, meaning your ability to sense your own inner body state, which is the foundation of the somatic anchor practice you built in Chapter 4. You will feel your own heartbeat. You will feel your chest rise and fall. You will feel the temperature of your own hand against your skin. This is not a comfort position. It is a data position. It keeps you connected to the body channel through which the corridor operates. By the end of Chapter 9, You will understand exactly why this matters in a way that is impossible to appreciate until you have experienced it. For now, just trust that the body is not the backdrop to the practice. The body is the practice. You now have the architecture, the window, the mechanism, the 4 loops, the somatic anchor, the breath clock, the position. Everything from here is application. Part TWO, The Night, Protocols. Chapter 7, Protocol OE, Dissolving The Inventory Loop. Quick reminder of what the inventory loop is. It is the mental replay of the day's unresolved events. The cycling back through what went wrong, what was incomplete, what produced friction. The loop runs not because your brain enjoys the content, but because your brain is trying to complete an open file. And here is why the standard advice for this loop, advice like let it go, or write in a gratitude journal before bed, or try to think about something positive instead, fails almost universally when applied to this specific pattern. The inventory loop is not running because you are holding on to negative emotions. It is running because your brain is following a documented cognitive principle called the Zeigarnik effect, named for Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who observed in the 1920s that the human brain holds unfinished tasks in active working memory with significantly greater persistence than finished tasks. Your brain is not replaying the meeting that went badly because it wants you to feel bad. It is replaying it because that cognitive file has not been closed. It is still marked open. And open files stay in working memory, running in the background, consuming processing space until the brain registers a completion signal. Telling yourself to let it go does not provide a completion signal. Thinking positive thoughts does not provide a completion signal. Feeling grateful for other things does not provide a completion signal. The file stays open. The loop continues. You try harder to ignore it. The brain, interpreting your effort to ignore it as evidence of its importance, increases the volume. The solution is not resolution. You do not need to actually solve the problem. You do not need to know exactly what to say to the client, or how the project will come together, or whether the relationship will recover. You need to provide the brain with what researchers call an artificial completion signal, a specific, concrete marker that the open file has been acknowledged, categorized, and assigned a next action. This is enough for the brain to release it from active working memory and allow sleep to proceed. Gina is 44 years old and works as a project manager at a mid-sized technology company. Her inventory loop was legendary, at least to her own nervous system. She would lie in bed for 60 to 90 minutes most nights, running mental replays of project status, team dynamics, client communications, decisions made, and decisions avoided. She was not anxious in the way we usually picture anxiety. She was methodical. Her brain was genuinely trying to manage open files. It simply had no off switch. Her therapist, who specialized in behavioral sleep interventions, introduced her to a technique so simple that Gina initially dismissed it. At the end of each night, before she began her pre-sleep routine, she would write 1 sentence per open item. Not a solution, not an analysis, not a full reflection. 1 sentence containing a single next action and, if possible, a time attached to it. Call Marcus about the budget, Tuesday morning. Email the client by end of day Thursday. Ask Diane what happened in the vendor call. That was the entire entry. 1 sentence. 1 next action. 1 time if possible. Each entry ended with the word filed, written, or said aloud. What this does is give the Zeigarnik effect what it is looking for. A completion signal for the categorization process, not the solution. The brain does not need to know the answer. It needs to know that the question has a home, that it will be addressed, that it is not at risk of being lost. When you write the next action and say filed, you are sending that signal. The file moves from active working memory to a stored queue. The loop has nothing left to run. Gina tracked her sleep onset time over 5 weeks using a simple clock note on her phone, recording the time she lay down and the time she estimated she fell asleep each morning. Before the technique, her average sleep onset was 82 minutes. After 5 weeks, it was under 20. Here's your protocol for the inventory loop. I am calling it the filing method. After your clock breath cycles, bring to mind any open items from the day or the week that your brain wants to review. Do not force them. Let them surface. Take the top 5 maximum, not more than 5. For each one, state, either in writing or internally, 1 next action. not a solution. One next action. Then say the word filed. Let your body do something physical to mark the completion. You can imagine setting something down or releasing something from your hands. Then move directly to your somatic anchor. The entire filing method should take between 3 and 6 minutes. If it is taking longer, you are trying to solve problems rather than file them. Bring your attention back to the single next action per item. Run this for 7 consecutive nights before you evaluate it. And here is the morning check that tells you whether it is working. Each morning, take 5 seconds to note whether you remember running the loop before sleep. Not whether the loop appeared. It probably will, at least initially, but how long it ran. You are looking for the loop to shorten, not disappear. Shortening is the signal. If what used to run for 90 minutes runs for 12, that is the protocol working. Complete disappearance of the loop is not the goal and is not a realistic early marker. Shortening is. Chapter 8. Protocol TWO, Interpene THE Forecast Loop. The forecast loop is the most neurologically stubborn of the 4 loops, and I want to be honest with you about why before I give you the protocol. Because if you go into this expecting to eliminate the loop, you will think the protocol is failing when it is actually working exactly as intended. The forecast loop, the brain's tendency to run anxiety-based future simulations before sleep, is not a malfunction. It is a feature of a survival system that is working correctly. The capacity to imagine threat in advance and prepare a response to it is one of the things that allowed our species to not go extinct. The brain that could simulate a predator's behavior and adjust its movement patterns accordingly survived longer than the brain that could only respond to threats as they appeared. The forecast loop is that system running in the modern context, where the threats are quarterly performance reviews and difficult relationship conversations rather than large animals in the dark. You are not trying to eliminate this system. You cannot. The goal is to redirect it. Here is the key insight from research on episodic future thinking, which is the technical name for the brain's capacity to mentally simulate future scenarios. The neural network that generates anxiety-based threat simulation is the same neural network that generates positive future simulation. They use identical hardware. The brain does not have a separate system for imagining bad futures and a separate system for imagining good ones. It has one future simulation system, and that system runs whichever scenario is loaded into it. This means that if you can deliberately load a specific, detailed, sensory-rich positive future scenario into the simulation system before it defaults to loading a threat scenario, you are not fighting the system. You are redirecting it. You are using the same machinery for a different output. Raymond is 53 years old and works as a director of sales for a regional distribution company. He has always been high-performing, which is partly why his forecast loop is so active. His brain is genuinely good at running threat scenarios. Before any important meeting, presentation, or negotiation, Raymond's forecast loop would activate the night before and run until 2 or 3 in the morning. He would simulate the conversation going wrong in 15 different ways. He would simulate a client becoming hostile. He would simulate himself missing a crucial data point. He would simulate his team underperforming. None of this had ever once changed what happened in the actual meeting. It had only consumed his sleep and arrived him at the meeting depleted. His psychiatrist introduced him to structured, positive, episodic future thinking, and the specifics matter enormously here. Not vague. Not imagine everything going well. Not visualize success in a general sense. A specific protocol, 3 minutes, the same time each night, imagining a specific scene from 6 months in the future with named, sensory concrete details. Not, I will be successful. Instead, I am sitting at the conference table in our second-floor meeting room. The light is coming in from the left. Marcus is across from me. He has just told me that the Q3 numbers exceeded target by 14%. I can feel the coffee cup in my hand. The room is warm. The specificity is not optional. It is the mechanism. A vague positive future does not load into the simulation system in the same way a specific sensory scene does. A vague positive future is a concept. A specific sensory scene is a simulation. The system runs simulations. It does not run concepts. Within 3 weeks, Raymond's pre-meeting sleep disruption had reduced measurably. He was still running some future simulation, But the system was now running his scenario as often as it was running the threat scenarios, and sometimes more. The threat scenarios were competing for time rather than dominating the space. Here is the protocol. I am calling it the advanced memory. After your clock breath cycles, and after the filing method, if you are also running an inventory loop, choose a specific future scene. It must be at minimum 6 months out, not 3 weeks, not next month, 6 months minimum. This is because the brain is much less likely to run credibility checks on a 6-month scenario. The gap is large enough that it cannot be immediately cross-referenced against current evidence. Name it with 3 specifics: the location, 1 other person present, and 1 physical detail. Temperature, the texture of a surface, the quality of light, the weight of something in your hand. Run the scene for exactly 3 minutes. Use a silent vibration timer if you need to. Do not let the 3 minutes expand indefinitely. The reason for the limit is that sustained positive future simulation can shift into anxious rehearsal if it runs unchecked. 3 minutes is the effective dose. End the scene with 1 internal statement. I have already been here. Not, I will get there. Not, I hope to be here. I have already been here. This is not a linguistic trick. It is a temporal re-anchoring that shifts the scene from aspirational to memorial, which the brain treats differently. The scene must be sensory specific. This cannot be overstated. Being successful does not work. Being confident does not work. The brain cannot simulate adjectives. It can simulate sitting at the corner table in the coffee shop on Whitfield Street, reading a message from Elena that says the deal closed. That works. The specificity is the signal. Chapter 9, Protocol 3, Reciting the Comparison Loop. Let us be honest about something before we discuss the protocol for the comparison loop, because honesty is the only way this protocol will work. The comparison loop is not entirely organic. A significant portion of it is manufactured. The social comparison impulse has existed in human psychology for as long as we have existed, but the specific intensity of the comparison loop in the modern evening is not a result of human nature alone. It is a result of deliberate engineering. Social media platforms algorithmically optimize for engagement in the evening hours, and the content format most reliably generates engagement, which is to say, the format most reliably keeps people scrolling, is content that activates upward social comparison. You see someone with more, you compare, you keep scrolling. The platform has achieved its goal. Your nervous system has absorbed the input. The loop has been loaded. A 2019 study from the University of Warwick found that upward social comparison before sleep, comparing yourself unfavorably to someone perceived as better off, correlated with a 23% reduction in reported dream richness the following morning and a measurable increase in morning cortisol levels. The effect was not subtle, and it was not short-lived. The comparison content consumed before sleep was affecting biological stress markers the following morning. The loop, once loaded, does not stay in the pre-sleep window. It reaches into the next day. Flora is 29 and works as a graphic designer. She is known for over a year that her nightly phone habit, checking Instagram and LinkedIn in bed before sleep, makes her feel worse. She has tried to stop. She has deleted apps and reinstalled them. She has put her phone on the other side of the room and retrieved it. She has set screen time limits and overridden them. This is not a discipline failure. This is a behavior with a neurological reward loop built into the platform itself. And willpower is a finite resource that does not compete well against infinite algorithmic refinement. The breakthrough for Flora was not eliminating the behavior. It was adding a specific counter protocol in the 5 minutes after the behavior ended. 5 minutes. After the phone went down, before the clock breath, she ran a specific internal inventory that re-anchored her reference point to her own timeline, rather than the aggregated timelines of everyone she followed. This is the protocol. I am calling it the personal timeline. After you put down your phone, and you want at least 5 minutes between phone down and clock breath, state internally 3 things from your own history. Each one must come from the same category, things that have specifically changed for you over the past 12 months. Here is the structure. One thing you could not do 12 months ago that you can do now. One thing you understand now that you did not understand 12 months ago. One relationship in your life that is stronger now than it was 12 months ago. I want to be very specific about the requirement for specificity here, because this protocol fails entirely if it is executed vaguely. I am a better person does not qualify. I can now have a difficult conversation with my mother without the call ending in a disconnection qualifies. I know more about my field does not qualify. I now understand the specific negotiation principle I always misread in client conversations qualifies. My friendships are better does not qualify. My friendship with Daniel is stronger now than a year ago because I told him the truth about something difficult and we came through it qualifies. The specificity requirement exists for the same reason the credibility filter exists. The brain is an evidence processing machine. Vague positive statements cannot be verified by the system. Specific, concrete, verifiable statements about your own actual history can be verified. When the brain verifies them, they land. They shift the reference point from an external comparison to an internal one. And the internal one, because it is based on your actual trajectory rather than someone else's curated output, is almost always more favorable than the comparison loop's default selection. Flora reported that within 2 weeks, the emotional residue of her social media use before bed had measurably decreased. Not because she had stopped using it, though she eventually did reduce her usage on her own terms, but because the 5 minutes immediately following it had been reprogrammed into something that counteracted it. She was ending the evening with her own evidence rather than everyone else's. The personal timeline takes approximately 3 to 4 minutes when done with the required specificity. Run it every night, regardless of whether you have been on your phone. Even on nights when you have not engaged in social media, the comparison loop can activate through other channels. Conversations during the day, things overheard, ambient social information. The personal timeline is not a response to social media specifically. It is a response to the comparison loop generally. Chapter 10. Protocol Foyer, Clausing The Deb S Loop, Poop, Loop. The DET loop requires more precision in its definition than the other three, because it is the most commonly misidentified. People often think they are running the inventory loop when they are actually running the DET loop, and the distinction matters because the two loops require entirely different interventions. Here is the distinction. The inventory loop is specific. It has content. There is a particular meeting, a particular conversation, a particular email. You can name the items. You can list them. The loop has structure even when it is uncomfortable. The DET loop is not specific. It is atmospheric. It is the feeling of being behind that does not attach to a particular item because it is not actually about a particular item. It is not about what you did not finish today. It is about the accumulated sense that your life, in some formless and hard-to-name way, has not added up to what it should have by now. That you owe more than you have given. That more time has passed than you have used. That the version of yourself you should be exists somewhere ahead of you, and you are not catching up to it. This is the DET loop. And it is specifically insidious because it cannot be solved the way the other loops can be solved, at least not directly. You cannot file it, because there is no specific item to file. You cannot redirect it into a future scene, because it is not about the future. You cannot re-anchor it to your own timeline in the way the comparison loop can be re-anchored, because it is not about comparison to others. It is about comparison to an ideal version of the self that has no clear definition and therefore no clear achievement threshold. The solution has to be structural rather than direct. You cannot close the DET loop by trying to refute the feeling of insufficiency, because trying to refute it gives the feeling more weight. You close it by systematically building a record of what actually happened in the day, a record so specific and so concrete and so indisputably true that the formless sense of insufficiency has nowhere to live in its presence. Angelo is 61 years old and taught high school English for 28 years before retiring 3 years ago. He was, by any external measure, a successful educator, respected by former students, valued by colleagues, and widely considered one of the better teachers his school had employed. He knew this. He acknowledged it intellectually. And still, from the first week of his retirement onward, he ran the DET loop every night with an intensity that surprised him. There was no specific failure. There was no particular regret he could name. There was only the pervasive, humid sense that he had not done enough. That the 28 years had not added up to enough. That there was a version of his teaching, a version of his relationships, a version of his intellectual contribution that had always been slightly out of reach, and that retirement had now confirmed would remain so. His therapist introduced him to what I am calling the ledger, not a gratitude journal, Angelo had tried gratitude journaling and found it produced a very specific kind of irritation, which was that he understood he was supposed to feel grateful and did not always feel it. And the gap between what he was supposed to feel and what he actually felt produced a secondary loop about emotional inadequacy on top of the original debt loop. The gratitude journal was not the right tool. The ledger is different. The ledger is not about feelings. It is about actions. Specifically, small, concrete, verifiable actions from the actual day that actually occurred. Here is the rule. 3 entries per night, minimum. Each entry must be verifiable. It must describe something that happened, not something you felt. It must be stated in past tense. And it must be specific enough that someone else, if they had been watching your day, could confirm it. I sent Maria a message when I knew she was having a hard time. That is verifiable. I was kind qualifies as nothing because it cannot be confirmed. I read 14 pages of the book I have been meaning to finish for 3 months. Verifiable. I made progress on personal development is so vague it cannot be distinguished from anything. I made a meal from scratch using the ingredients that were about to go bad rather than ordering out. Verifiable. Specific. Indisputable. Each ledger entry ends with a closing statement. Say it the same way every night. This was enough. I was here. Not as a philosophical position you need to fully believe. As a closing signal. The same way filed signals the completion of the inventory loop. This was enough. I was here. Signals the completion of the ledger. The brain needs a clear close to register an end state. Angelo ran the ledger for 21 consecutive nights. His report at the end of that period was not that the debt loop was gone. It was that the loop had thinned, that it appeared for a shorter time before the ledger entries made it contract. That by night 14, he sometimes found himself completing the ledger and realizing the loop had not appeared at all that night, or that it had appeared and he had barely noticed it because the ledger was already running. He described it this way. I had been arguing with the feeling for years. The ledger did not argue with it. It just put facts next to it. And facts are heavier. You now have the 4 loop protocols. You have the clock breath prerequisite. You have the somatic anchor. You have the position. You have the full architecture of the nightly practice. In part 3, we move into something that most programs in this space either skip entirely or address in 2 sentences, because it requires being honest about the experience in a way that is less appealing than the idea that everything will get steadily better from night 1. The middle nights. The nights of resistance, plateau, and apparent stagnation. And why those nights are not just survivable, but are actually the most important nights in the entire program. Part TH-RE, Thiesh im Bidalo, Ni Ets, Resistance, Pladius, and W8 Hat, The Mean. Chapter 11, The Neat It Gets Worse. Now I want to tell you about David. David is 41 years old. He manages logistics operations for a regional freight company, which means his days are a sustained exercise in managing complexity, variables he cannot fully control, and the consequences of other people's decisions. He is good at his job. He is also, by his own description, someone who has not slept well since his mid-30s. David started this program on a Monday night. He had been tracking his morning anxiety levels on a simple 1 to 10 scale at his therapist's suggestion, and he had been hovering between 6.5 and 8 for the better part of 6 months. Nights 1 and 2, marginal improvement in sleep onset. Not dramatic, but he fell asleep faster than usual, and he noticed it. Night 3, noticeably better. He completed the filing method, ran 2 cycles of the advanced memory, held his somatic anchor for what felt like the full 90 seconds, and was asleep, by his estimate, within 18 minutes. For someone who had been averaging 55 minutes, this felt like a breakthrough. Night 4, the worst night he had had in months. His mind would not quiet. The protocols felt mechanical, like following a recipe for a dish you did not want to eat. The filing method felt hollow. The advanced memory felt forced. The future scene did not feel real. It felt like a bad movie he was directing badly. The clock breath did not shift anything. He lay in the dark for 2 hours. His anxiety, which had been trending down over the previous 3 nights, felt like it had returned to baseline and then exceeded it. He seriously considered that the program was wrong for him, or that he had done something incorrectly on night 3 that had reversed whatever had been building. He almost quit on night 5. He did not quit on night 5. He ran a stripped-down version of the protocols with minimal expectations and fell asleep within 25 minutes. Night 7. Standard execution, sleep onset under 20 minutes. Night 11. His morning anxiety rating was 3.1, down from a sustained average of 7.4. What happened on night 4 was not the program failing. It was not David doing something wrong. It was a documented phenomenon in behavioral psychology called an extinction burst. When a conditioned response, meaning a behavior or pattern that has been consistently reinforced over time, is being extinguished through a new behavioral protocol, the conditioned response does not fade gradually and gracefully from day 1. It resists. And the resistance often intensifies just before the pattern breaks. The old pattern produces its strongest activation in the period immediately before it loses its grip. Behavioral researchers studying everything from addiction recovery to phobia extinction to habit change have documented this with consistency. The peak of the old behavior is often the last flourish before the new pattern takes over. David's night 4 was the old pattern's extinction burst. His brain's default pre-sleep architecture, the one he had been running for years, produced one final, forceful activation before the new structure began to replace it. The protocols felt mechanical because they were competing against a deeply entrenched system that was fighting back with everything it had. If you had taken David's self-report on night 4 at face value, you would have concluded the program was not working. If you had looked at his 11-day arc, you would have concluded that night 4 was the pivot point. Here's the instruction for this chapter, and it is the most important single instruction in this entire program. If you hit a night, or 2 nights, or 3 consecutive nights that feel worse than when you started, do not adjust the protocol. Do not add new elements to try to force progress. Do not reduce the protocol to make it more comfortable. Run it anyway, all of it, even if it feels mechanical, even if the future scene does not feel real, even if the anchor does not land. Even if you complete the entire sequence and still lie awake for an hour afterward, what you are experiencing in those nights is not the system breaking down. It is the old system breaking down. Those are categorically different things. One is a reason to stop. The other is a reason to continue. Learning to distinguish between them is the skill that separates people who complete behavioral reprogramming from people who try it. Chapter 12. The Play Chow Pace, Tays, WH My, Nohing Seems, TOBE Happening. After the extinction burst, if you continue through it, most people enter a period that is in some ways more psychologically challenging than the difficult nights. Not because things are getting worse, because nothing seems to be getting better. The practice is running. The protocols are completing. Sleep onset is roughly stable. Morning diagnostics are roughly stable. And there is a period, often lasting from day 10 to day 18, sometimes extending to day 21, where the subjective experience is, I am doing everything right, and I cannot detect a meaningful difference from where I started. This is the plateau phase. And understanding what it is requires understanding how neuroplasticity actually operates. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to form new neural connections and reorganize existing ones, does not operate on a linear progress curve. It operates on what neuroscientists call a consolidation schedule. When you expose the brain to a new repeated pattern, new synaptic connections begin forming almost immediately. But the formation of new connections is not the same as the stabilization of new connections. Stabilization requires repeated consolidation cycles, which occur during sleep, and it takes a minimum of 21 to 28 days for new synaptic pathways to reach structural stability. During this period, the connections are forming. They are becoming measurably different from what they were on day 1. But the subjective experience of change often lags 2 to 3 weeks behind the actual neural change. The brain is building something new, and the new thing is not yet strong enough to be felt. Trudy is 48 years old and works as a physical therapist. She is, by professional training, a precise observer of change and outcome, and she applied that precision to this program by keeping a meticulous nightly log. Every morning she recorded her sleep onset estimate, her dream tone, her body state, and her active loop from the night before. By day 14, her log entry read, "Nothing is different." The precision of her tracking was producing data that she could not meaningfully interpret yet because the change was happening below the resolution of her observational instruments. By day 22, her log entry read, "Something is different, and I do not know when it changed." She went back through her log looking for the day it had changed. She could not find it. There was no single day. There was no morning where the entries before and after were clearly different. The change had accumulated invisibly across the plateau phase and had crossed some threshold of detectability at day 22 without announcing itself. Think of a bridge under construction. For weeks, possibly months, you drive past the construction site, and what you see is noise, disruption, vehicles, scaffolding, and no obvious emerging structure. Then one day you drive past and the span has closed. The two sides are connected. It appears, from the outside, to have happened that day. It did not happen that day. The closing required everything that came before it. Every bolt, every cable, every load-bearing calculation, every piece of scaffolding that you drove past and thought was not yet a bridge. You were not watching a bridge fail to be built. You were watching a bridge being built. The closing was prepared across all the previous weeks. It simply became visible on a single morning. The plateau phase is the bridge being built. It does not feel like progress. It is progress. Specifically and measurably, it is progress. Here is your action for this chapter. At day 21, regardless of how you feel about where you are, go back and read your day 1 morning diagnostic note. The one from the chapter 2 exercise where you wrote one sentence describing what you were thinking about before sleep on night 1. Read it next to what you write on day 21. The difference between those two notes will not match what you expected to find. It will be more specific and more concrete than transformation mythology would suggest. It will also be more real. Because real change does not feel the way movies suggest it should feel. It feels like one morning you drove past the construction site and the bridge was there. Chapter 13. Chen mind gu he mind gus qeat. Recognizing he saft. The shift does not announce itself loudly. This matters to say directly because the expectation of a dramatic internal announcement is one of the things that makes people miss the shift when it arrives, or dismiss it as coincidence rather than recognizing it as the outcome of the work. There are 3 specific signals. They do not all arrive together. They do not all arrive at the same point in the 21 to 20 8-day consolidation window. But all 3 tend to appear within the first 30 days for people who have run the protocols consistently. The first signal is that the loop shortens. You are still running the inventory loop, or the forecast loop, or whichever loop is your dominant pattern. But you catch it earlier in its cycle. Instead of being inside the loop and running it for 40 minutes before you notice you are running it, you notice it at the 3-minute mark. You observe it from outside rather than being consumed by it from inside. The loop may still run, but it runs shorter, and it runs with less force, and you begin to be able to see it the way you see weather from inside a window. Present, observable, not you. The second signal is that your morning orientation changes. For most people running the default pre-sleep loops, the first thought of the morning is backward scanning. The mind reaches immediately for unresolved items from the previous day or anxiety about the day ahead. The second signal that the shift has occurred is that you notice your first morning thought is, increasingly, forward-looking. Not in a forced or effortful way, just structurally different. Oriented toward what is coming rather than what went wrong. The third signal is the one that requires the most nuanced interpretation. The protocol starts to feel unnecessary. Not because you have abandoned it, not because the practice has lost its value, but because the state the protocol produces has become, in some measure, your default entry into the night. The clock breath still works, the filing method still helps, the advanced memory still runs, but they are maintaining something rather than building something, and the difference is palpable once you have experienced it. Lola is 37 years old and works as a fiction writer. She described the shift in a way that I think captures it better than any clinical description could. She said, "I realized I had stopped dreading going to bed. I used to lie down and feel the anxiety start before I even began the protocols. It was like a reflex, a tension in my chest that activated the moment I pulled back the covers. And then one night, I noticed I was already calm before I started the breathing. I had not done anything yet. The corridor was open, and nothing bad was waiting at the entrance. I could not tell you exactly when it changed, but I knew it had. This is the important calibration for this chapter. The shift in Lola's description, the absence of dread at the entrance to the corridor, is not the end of the practice. It is the beginning of the maintenance phase. The practice does not stop when the state becomes easier. The practice becomes lighter. It takes less effort to produce the same result, which is exactly the definition of a well-installed neural pattern. The old pattern required no effort. The new pattern will eventually require no effort either. But it takes approximately 90 days of consistent practice for that level of automaticity to establish itself. What you are noticing in week 3 or week 4 is the early signal of where you are heading, not the destination. Keep going. Chapter 14. The role, OF Dreams N, The Reprogramming CYCLE. Here is the counterintuitive claim at the center of this chapter, and it is important to hold it with the precision it requires, because loose thinking about dreams is one of the most reliable ways to confuse yourself during this program. Dreams are not passive experiences you have. They are an active, neurologically essential process your brain performs. The distinction matters because it changes how you relate to your dream content during the 21 to 90-day window. If dreams are something that happen to you, then paying attention to them is interesting, but not particularly informative. If dreams are something your brain is actively doing, then their content, and especially their emotional texture, is a readout of what your brain is currently processing. It is diagnostic data. Matthew Walker, neuroscientist and sleep researcher, documented through extensive laboratory work what sleep researchers have come to understand as one of the most important functions of REM sleep. During REM, the hippocampus replays the day's experiences, and the emotional charge attached to those experiences is processed and attenuated. Memories are not simply stored during sleep. They are stripped of their cortisol charge. The same event that felt threatening in the evening, when processed through REM sleep, feels less threatening the following morning. This is why sleep has been described, not poetically but mechanistically, as a form of overnight therapy. What this means for the reprogramming program is that your dreams are showing you where in the process your brain currently is, not symbolically in the mystical sense, diagnostically in the clinical sense. The emotional tone of your dreams reflects the current state of your default neural patterns more accurately than your waking self-assessment does, because the waking self-assessment is filtered through the very prefrontal systems that the program is working to reprogram. The dreams are the unfiltered signal. Here is the 3-phase dream shift that people running this program reliably report. Phase 1 runs across approximately the first 7 nights. Dreams become more vivid and often more threatening or emotionally intense. This surprises people and sometimes worries them. They interpret the increase in dream intensity as a sign that things are getting worse. It is not. It is a sign that REM engagement is increasing, which is the first effect of improved sleep architecture. The brain is more active in REM, which means it is processing more. The content is intense because the material being processed is the old pattern material, the same anxiety loops and default programs that have been running in the pre-sleep window. They are being processed through REM for the first time with higher efficiency, which means the processing feels more vivid. This is the right direction. Phase 2 runs approximately from nights 8 through 18. Narrative coherence in dreams increases. This is the signal to watch for if you are keeping the 2-sentence morning dream note. You begin to notice that in dreams, you are more often a protagonist than a passive observer or a victim. The story of the dream has a structure in which you are acting rather than being acted upon. The dream is not yet resolving its conflicts, but you are in the story rather than being thrown around by the story. Phase 3 begins at approximately night 19 and becomes more consistent through the 28-day consolidation window. Resolution dreams. Conflicts in dreams more often find a resolution within the dream itself. Not always, not every night, but the pattern shifts. You begin to wake from dreams not at the peak of tension, but after the tension has moved. This is the clearest dream-level signal that the default pattern has changed. The brain is no longer rehearsing irresolution. It is beginning to rehearse resolution. Here is the practical instruction. Keep a 2-sentence dream note for 21 nights. Not an interpretation, not a full description. Just 2 things. First, Protagonist or bystander? Were you an active agent in the dream, or were you being acted upon by events? Second, resolution or interruption? Did the dream's central tension find any form of resolution, or did the dream end in the middle of the tension? You are not analyzing content. You are tracking structure. The pattern in those two data points across 21 nights will show you the phase you were in more accurately than any self-report about how you feel. Chapter 15. The Morning Protocol, Wachat U Do N, The First Forced 4 Minutes. Here is something that the research on sleep and waking states makes clear, but that almost no practical program for improving sleep quality addresses. Sleep does not end sharply. The transition from sleep to full waking consciousness is a gradient, not a switch. In the first 4 to 6 minutes after waking, your prefrontal cortex is still returning from its overnight reduced activity. The electrical state of your brain during this window is functionally similar to the hypnagogic state before sleep. It is a hypnopompic state, the neurological mirror of the pre-sleep corridor, and it has nearly identical properties in terms of heightened associativity, reduced critical filtering, and elevated receptivity to suggestion. In other words, there is a second corridor every morning, and most people walk through it looking at their phones. Research on mood contagion, which is the documented tendency for early emotional inputs to set the baseline for subsequent emotional processing, shows that the first informational inputs received in the morning have a disproportionate effect on emotional tone for the following 4 to 6 hours. Your morning mood is not determined primarily by the quality of the sleep you had. It is determined heavily by what you feed your brain in the first few minutes after waking. The hypnopompic window is as programmable as the hypnagogic window, and it is being handed by default to whatever the phone delivers. Nora is 52 years old and has worked in executive roles in the healthcare sector for most of her career. She is a precise, methodical person who is accustomed to managing complex systems. She was also, for years, a person who reached for her phone within 30 seconds of waking. She did not think of this as a choice. It had become as automatic as reaching for a glass of water. Email, news, calendar. 3 inputs, delivered into the hypnopompic window before the prefrontal cortex was fully operational, setting the baseline for her morning before she had consciously participated in what the morning was going to be. Nora started treating her first 4 minutes after waking as what she called sealed time. No phone, no news, no conversation, no content from the external world. Just a specific 4-minute sequence that she ran in the same order every morning. She tracked her afternoon energy on a simple 1 to 10 scale, which she had been doing for months before the change. Her pre-protocol average was 4.1. After 6 weeks of the morning protocol, it was 6.6. Her morning itself had not changed dramatically, but what she brought out of the morning into the day had changed. Here is the protocol. I am calling it the seal because it seals the work from the night into the beginning of the day. Minute 1, stay horizontal. Do not sit up. 2 cycles of the clock breath, just 2. This extends the hypnopompic window slightly rather than collapsing it immediately with movement and environmental input. Minute 2, dream node. Just the 2 data points from Chapter 14. Protagonist or bystander. Resolution or interruption. Say them to yourself or write them if you have a notebook on your nightstand. 30 seconds maximum. Minute 3. Body inventory. Scan your physical state in one pass from head to feet. You are looking for one word. Tight or loose. Heavy or light. You are not analyzing or interpreting. You are registering the current state of the body you will be inhabiting for the next 16 hours. Minute 4. One sentence beginning with the words, "Today I am moving toward blank." Complete the sentence. It does not need to be grand. It does not need to reference your long-term goals. It simply needs to be true, forward-oriented, and specific enough to distinguish today from yesterday. Only after those 4 minutes, sit up, pick up your phone, enter the day. The seal does not fight against the morning. It does not demand that you become a different kind of person who has elaborate morning rituals and wakes before sunrise to meditate. It takes 4 minutes. It uses the window that already exists. It simply occupies that window with direction rather than defaulting it to the algorithm. You now have the full diagnostic and foundational architecture of this program: the pre-sleep corridor, the 4 loops, the clock breath, the somatic anchor, the sleep position, the 4 loop protocols, the understanding of resistance and plateau, the dream diagnostics, and the morning seal. What remains is the advanced application layer, where each of the core protocols is adapted to a specific life domain. This is where the program becomes personal. Part 4, Advanced Protocols, Specific OUTcomes. Chapter 16, Reprogramming FOR, Confidence, The Identité Recharsal Protocol. Here is the most important thing you could understand about confidence, and it is directly counter to how confidence is usually discussed. Confidence is not a feeling that precedes action. It is a post hoc interpretation of remembered action. What this means is that confidence is not what gives you the ability to do something. It is what your brain assigns to the memory of having done it. The sequence is, you act, often without confidence. The action produces an outcome, the brain files the experience as evidence, and the accumulated evidence is what the brain draws on when generating the feeling we call confidence. The feeling is retrospective. It is memory-based. It is built from what psychologists call mastery experiences, specific episodes of successful performance in a given domain. This creates a problem for anyone trying to build confidence in an area where they have little or no experience. You need the mastery experiences to generate the confidence, but you need some baseline of confidence to take the actions that produce the mastery experiences. It is a loop with no obvious entry point, except that Albert Bandura, the psychologist whose self-efficacy research is among the most replicated in the field, documented something that cuts through this problem. Imagine mastery experiences, when they are sufficiently vivid, somatic, and specific, produce measurably similar self-efficacy gains to actual enacted experiences, particularly in novel domains. The brain, when running a sufficiently detailed simulation, does not cleanly distinguish between memory of an imagined event and memory of a real one. Both get filed as evidence. Both contribute to the confidence architecture. This is not permission to fantasize instead of act. It is permission to build the confidence foundation in the pre-sleep corridor so that when the moment for action arrives, the brain is drawing on a larger pool of evidence than it otherwise would have had. Victor is 34 years old and is in the middle of a significant career transition. He spent 8 years as an accountant and has been working for the past 18 months to build a career as a professional speaker and facilitator. He has the intellectual content. He has the motivation. What he has lacked is the neurological confidence architecture that comes from having stood at a podium in front of hundreds of people many times. He has done it a handful of times. The evidence pool is thin. The self-efficacy score is low. Victor started using pre-sleep identity rehearsal for 28 consecutive nights. The specific scene he used was not general. It was precise. A specific conference room at a venue he had visited once. A specific audience size of approximately 80 people, a specific 3-minute segment of a specific talk he was developing, and specific physical sensations within that segment. The weight of the microphone, the temperature of the room, the sensation in his feet on the stage floor. He ran the scene at 3 levels, wide zoom. He imagined himself in the full context, walking into the room, reading the energy of the space, settling into the beginning of the session. Medium zoom. He ran the specific 3 minutes of content, the transitions, the pauses, the responses to the room. Close zoom. He focused entirely on his body state during those 3 minutes, his breath, his posture, the quality of his voice in his own chest, the sensation of being present and capable. He held the close zoom for a minimum of 90 seconds. Then he pressed his thumb and index finger together. The same gesture, every night. The somatic anchor for the identity state he was rehearsing. When Victor gave his first major presentation 28 nights later, he reported that it felt like the second time, not the first. Not because it went perfectly. It did not go perfectly. Because the body state it required was already in his evidence pool. He had been there before, not in reality, in the corridor. And the brain, retrieving the evidence for how to feel about standing in front of 80 people, found it. Here is the protocol. I am calling it identity rehearsal. After your clock breath and your loop protocol, choose one specific future competence scenario. Not a feeling of being successful. A scene of performing a specific competence. One scene only. Run it at the 3 zoom levels I described: wide, medium, close. Hold close zoom for minimum 90 seconds. End with your physical gesture, whatever you have chosen as your anchor, pressing thumb to index finger, or placing your hand over your sternum, or whatever specific gesture is yours. Do this for a minimum of 28 consecutive nights before evaluating. 1 scene only. The temptation will be to rotate scenes. Resist it. Depth of encoding matters more than breadth. 1 scene deeply rehearsed outperforms 5 scenes shallowly rehearsed by a significant margin. Chapter 17. Reprogramming, FOR, Relationships, Shearance Protocol. The HeartMath Institute, a research organization focused on the psychophysiology of stress and emotion, has produced a body of work examining what they call cardiac coherence, the state in which the heart's electrical pattern becomes ordered, rhythmic, and measurably different from the erratic variability typical of stress states. What is particularly relevant here is the interpersonal research. Individuals who practiced regular cardiac coherence exercises reported measurable improvements in relational quality in the days following the practice, specifically in the domains of conflict regulation and empathic response. The body state changed the relational behavior, not through intention or decision, but through physiology. Connie is 45 years old. She is a licensed therapist by training and a mother of 3 by circumstance, and she would tell you without hesitation that the most challenging therapeutic relationship she has navigated in the past several years is not one of her clients. It is her relationship with her 14-year-old son. She understood, intellectually, what was happening in their dynamic. She understood adolescent neurodevelopment. She understood the attachment patterns they had built and where they were straining. She understood the specific triggers, on both sides, that escalated small friction into larger conflict. Knowing all of this did not particularly help. Conflict occurred approximately 4 to 5 times per week. The conflict was not severe, but it was consistent, and it was wearing down something between them. The intervention Connie used was not a conversation technique. It was not a communication framework. It was a 3-minute pre-sleep practice. Before sleep, she identified one specific memory of genuine connection with her son. Not a current positive memory, those were available, but they were fragile, and accessing them too directly during a period of active conflict sometimes produced a secondary reaction of grief or frustration about the gap between that memory and the current dynamic. She went further back, a memory from 5 years prior. Her son at 9, working on a drawing project at the kitchen table, asking her to sit with him and talk about nothing in particular, and the quality of presence between them in that ordinary moment. She held that memory not conceptually, but somatically. What did her chest feel like in that moment? What was the quality of openness or warmth that was physically present in her body at that moment? She held the body state, not the content of the memory, the state. And then she projected forward. She imagined her son not as he was currently, in the friction and the complexity of adolescence, but as his best version, the version she could see in him when the friction cleared, the version he was becoming. She held that image with the body state from the memory. No words, no visualization in the narrative sense, no script for how their next conversation would go. Just a somatic state, held and projected forward towards someone she loved who was difficult to be with right now. By week 4, the frequency of conflict initiation had dropped from approximately 4 to 5 times per week to under 2. Connie had not changed her approach to specific conversations. She had not introduced new rules or structures. She had changed what physiological state she was carrying into their shared space, and the shared space had changed in response. Here is the protocol. I am calling it the coherence practice. Choose one relationship you want to shift. It does not need to be a damaged relationship. It can be any relationship you want to deepen or improve. Identify one specific memory of genuine connection with that person. Go as far back as you need to in order to find one that is unambiguous and uncontaminated by current friction. Hold the memory at the somatic level only. What did your chest feel like? What was the quality of the energy between you? Then send that state forward. Imagine the person in their best version of themselves. Not an idealized fantasy version, their actual best version, which you have probably seen at some point. Hold both things simultaneously, the body state from the connection memory and the image of their best self. 3 minutes. No words required. This is not a visualization. It is a somatic transmission practice, and its mechanism is the physiological state you carry into proximity with that person in the days that follow. Chapter 18, Reprogramming FOR, Creative OUTPP, The Incubation Protocol. Thomas Edison with his steel balls was not performing a ritual. He was exploiting a specific property of the hypnagogic state for creative problem solving, and he was doing it decades before neuroscience had the vocabulary to explain why it worked. August Kekule, the German chemist working on the molecular structure of benzene in the mid-19th century, famously described seeing in a hypnagogic state the image of a snake eating its own tail, the ancient Ouroboros symbol, which led him to the insight that benzene had a ring structure rather than a linear one. This is documented in the historical record. Elias Howe, struggling to design the mechanical needle for the sewing machine, had been stuck on the specific problem of where to place the eye of the needle. In a dream state, he saw warriors whose spears had holes near their tips. The next morning, he moved the eye of the needle to the tip rather than the center. The sewing machine needle, in the form used in every sewing machine built since, resulted from this. These are not folklore. They are documented episodes in which complex problems that had resisted analytical conscious mind solution were resolved through the hypnagogic or sleep state. And the mechanism is not mystical. It is the default mode network. The default mode network is the neural circuit that activates during rest, during mind wandering, and during the pre-sleep state. It is the circuit responsible for what neuroscientists call nonlinear associative processing, the ability to make connections between stored concepts across domains without being constrained by the logical filtering that executive function applies during focused analytical thinking. Problems that require novel association, creative problems, strategic problems, design problems, problems that have no solution available through linear extension of what is already known, are specifically well suited to DMN processing because the prefrontal executive function that would normally discard unusual connections as illogical is precisely the function that goes offline in the hypnagogic state. You are not less smart in the corridor. You are smart in a different way. The connections that analytical processing would never allow become available. And the solutions that require those connections, the ones that have been blocked, not by lack of intelligence, but by excess of analytical filtering, become possible. Teresa is 31 years old and works as a product designer for a technology startup. She had been stuck for 3 weeks on a specific user experience problem, a navigation architecture that needed to serve 4 different user types simultaneously without creating the cognitive load that typically accompanies complex information hierarchies. She had tried everything available to her in waking analytical mode: whiteboard sessions, user research, competitive analysis, prototyping. Each approach produced solutions that worked for 2 or 3 of the 4 user types and failed for the others. The problem had a design constraint that made linear optimization impossible. It required a structural insight that was not available through extension of existing approaches. Teresa started using the incubation protocol on a Tuesday. On the following Sunday night, she woke at approximately 3 in the morning with a specific, complete solution. She had placed a notepad on her nightstand at the start of the protocol, which her instinct said was slightly dramatic, but which she had done anyway. She wrote for approximately 90 seconds and went back to sleep. In the morning, she reviewed the note. The solution held. It was not a half-formed idea that would require elaboration. It was a specific structural approach that resolved the 4 user type constraint in a way that none of her analytical sessions had produced. Here is the protocol. I am calling it the problem drop. Before you begin your clock breath, state the problem you are working on in 1 sentence. 1 sentence only. Precision matters. Not "I need a better creative approach to my work," but "I am looking for a structural solution to the navigation architecture problem that serves all 4 user types." 1 sentence. Specific. Then, during your clock breath and through your loop protocol and into sleep, do not try to solve it. Actively abandon it. Set it down. This is essential and counterintuitive. The DMN does not work on problems you are consciously trying to solve. It works on problems you have handed over. You cannot drive and let someone else navigate at the same time. You hand over the wheel. Keep a notepad, not a phone, on your nightstand. In the morning, before the seal, before you check anything, write for 90 seconds without filtering. Whatever is present in your mind. Do not edit. Do not evaluate. Just write. Review what you have written only after breakfast, not immediately. Immediacy triggers the analytical filter. You want the first passive review to happen when the hypnopompic state has fully cleared and the prefrontal system is fully online, because then you are evaluating the content rather than generating more of it. Some nights will produce nothing that is retrievable in the morning. This is normal. The DMN is processing asynchronously. The insight may arrive on night 6. It may arrive 3 weeks later when you have moved on to other problems and have stopped expecting it. What the protocol does is keep the channel open and ensure the problem is in the processing queue. The timing of the output is not under your control. The quality of the submission to the queue is Chapter 19, Reprogramming FOR PHYsical Helch He Beatty Signal Protocol. 70 to 80% of your body's daily growth hormone secretion occurs during slow-wave sleep, not across the night, during slow-wave sleep specifically. And stress hormones, primarily cortisol, directly suppress growth hormone release. Pre-sleep cortisol is pre-sleep suppression of physical recovery, regardless of how many hours you spend in bed. This is not a peripheral finding. It is one of the most practically significant implications of the relationship between stress physiology and sleep biology. If you go to bed with high cortisol, your slow-wave sleep will be shallower and your growth hormone output will be reduced. You may sleep 8 hours and wake up feeling unrecovered. This is why sleep duration and sleep quality are not the same thing, and why the state you enter the corridor with determines the quality of the repair your body performs while you are in it. Paul is 42 years old and has been an endurance athlete for most of his adult life. He trains consistently, tracks his recovery with a wearable device, and takes his sleep seriously. He was consistently logging 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep time. He was consistently waking up feeling, as he described it, like he had slept 5. His HRV, which his wearable tracks as a morning recovery score, was chronically below his baseline. When he looked at his pre-sleep patterns, the dominant loop was almost entirely forecast: race-related scenarios, performance anxiety, mental rehearsal of races that were weeks or months away. He was not experiencing the race. He was stress testing it, running worst-case outcomes, and going to bed in a cortisol-elevated state that his body spent the next 8 hours trying to recover from instead of actually recovering. The intervention was a redirection of pre-sleep attention away from performance narrative and toward physical recovery instruction, a body-directed protocol rather than a narrative-directed one. Here is the protocol. I am calling it the Recovery Directive. After your clock breath, conduct a slow body scan from head to feet. Take approximately 60 seconds, one pass. At each zone where you notice tension, resistance, or heaviness, do not try to relax it. Do not try to release it. Simply notice it and name it internally. Shoulders, present. Lower back, present. Jaw, present. You are not trying to fix anything. You are registering it. The act of registration, without the attempt to control, is itself a parasympathetic signal. After the scan, state internally, my body knows how to repair. I am giving it this night, not as an affirmation you need to believe, as an instruction you are delivering. The body is a system that responds to environmental and internal signals. You are changing the signal from performance monitoring to recovery permission. Then move into your advanced memory or identity rehearsal protocol if you are using one. Let the somatic anchor be your final conscious input before sleep takes over. Paul tracked this protocol for 14 nights. His morning HRV scores, which had been chronically below baseline, crossed into recovery territory for 11 of those 14 nights. His subjective experience of waking, independent of the HRV data, shifted from the word depleted, which he had used consistently in his pre-protocol logs, to the word available. He did not feel fully recovered, not yet. He felt available for the day's work. That was the shift. Chapter 20, Reprogramming FOR Financial Reality He Scarcity Interrupt Protocol. The relationship between financial anxiety and sleep quality is one of the most studied and most vicious feedback loops in adult psychology. And vicious is the precise word, because the loop does not just run in one direction. Financial anxiety before sleep compromises sleep quality. Compromised sleep quality directly impairs the next day's cognitive performance, including specifically working memory, impulse control, and executive function, which are precisely the cognitive capacities most needed for sound financial decision-making. Reduced cognitive capacity produces worse financial decisions. Worse financial decisions produce more financial anxiety. The anxiety returns to the pre-sleep window the following night. The loop reinforces itself. A 2013 paper in the journal Science, authored by Mani and colleagues at Princeton and Harvard, quantified the cognitive cost of financial scarcity with remarkable specificity. People in conditions of financial scarcity showed measurable reductions in performance on tasks requiring working memory and fluid intelligence equivalent to an estimated 13 IQ points. To put that in context, a reduction of 13 IQ points is roughly the cognitive impact of losing a full night of sleep or of being functionally intoxicated. The scarcity itself was consuming cognitive bandwidth. The implication for the pre-sleep window is direct. Financial anxiety in the corridor is not just emotionally unpleasant. It is cognitively degrading the very resources you will need the next day to address the financial situation you are anxious about. Carlo is 38 years old and works as a self-employed contractor. His income is variable, his expenses are fixed, and the gap between them is a source of almost continuous low-grade anxiety that peaks in the hour before sleep. His pre-sleep mental content was extraordinarily specific. Specific dollar amounts, specific payment deadlines, specific faces of people he felt he owed, specific worst-case scenarios for the next 30 days. The specificity of his anxiety was actually a sign of an organized mind trying to manage a genuinely complex situation. But in the pre-sleep window, that specificity was feeding the forecast loop and the debt loop simultaneously, and both were running at full volume. The intervention was not to replace financial anxiety with financial positivity. That would have failed the credibility filter immediately. Carlo's brain was not going to accept "I am abundant" when the specific dollar amounts in his working memory told a more complicated story. The intervention was to redirect the specificity toward facts that were true, neutral, or positive, and verifiable, rather than facts that were true, threatening, and simulated. Here is the protocol. I am calling it the specific ledger for financial reality. Do not use this protocol. I am abundant. I attract wealth. Money flows to me easily. These statements fail the credibility filter in the same way Marco's affirmations failed it in Chapter 2. You are not trying to convince your brain of something. You are trying to give your brain accurate data to replace the inaccurate simulation it is running. Use this protocol instead. State 3 specific, true financial facts that are neutral or positive. They must be verifiable. They must refer to the actual present, not a desired future. My rent is paid through the end of next month. I have enough food in this house for the next 7 days. The car payment was made on time. These are not inspiring. They are not motivational. They are simply true. And truth in the pre-sleep window is more powerful than aspiration. Follow the 3 facts with one action statement in this specific format. Tomorrow, at a specific time, I will take one specific financial action. Not, I will work harder. Not, I will figure something out. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I will call the client about the outstanding invoice. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I will transfer the amount I set aside into the savings account. One action, one time. Specific and executable. Then say internally, filed. The mechanism here is the same as the filing method for the inventory loop. Financial anxiety, at the pre-sleep level, is largely driven by the brain's attempt to keep open financial files in active working memory to prevent them from being lost. By stating true present facts and attaching one concrete next action, you are giving the brain the completion signal it is looking for. The files are acknowledged. The next action is specified. The brain can release them from active processing and allow the corridor to do its actual work. Carlo ran this protocol for 30 nights. His financial situation did not change substantially in those 30 nights. What changed was the quality of his sleep, which he estimated improved his productive work hours by approximately 90 minutes per day, which he estimated produced additional income over the following 2 months that was measurably larger than his pre-protocol output. He was not doing more. He was doing the same work with a brain that had been allowed to recover overnight instead of spending the night running financial simulations. The irony, which is not actually ironic but is the direct implication of everything we have covered, is that the best thing he could do for his financial situation was let his brain stop processing it for 8 hours. The productivity recovered in sleep returned more value than the nights spent simulating worst-case scenarios. Part 5. The He Long Game, Sustaining and Deepening The He Practice. Chapter 21. The He 90D Ars Etcher How To Build On You Have started. The program divides across 90 days into 3 distinct phases, and understanding the purpose and markers of each phase is essential for knowing what to do, what to expect, and how to interpret what you are experiencing at any given point. Phase 1 runs from days 1 through 21, the rehabilitation phase. The goal in Phase 1 is not transformation. The goal is interruption and establishment. You are interrupting the existing loops, establishing the clock breath as an automatic nightly habit, and building the diagnostic awareness that will drive everything in Phases 2 and 3. This is foundation work. It is not glamorous. It will not feel like rapid change, particularly after the first week. The extinction burst may appear. The plateau will certainly appear. The success marker for Phase 1 is not that you feel dramatically different. It is 2 things. Your sleep onset time has shortened by at least 15% from your baseline, and the morning diagnostic, the 1-sentence note about your pre-sleep state, has become automatic enough that you do not need to remind yourself to do it. Phase 2 runs from days 22 through 56, the installation phase. The goal in Phase 2 is to move from consciously executing the protocols to semi-automatically managing your pre-sleep state. The difference is significant. In Phase 1, you run the protocols deliberately. You think about each step. You check yourself against the sequence. In Phase 2, the sequence begins to run with less conscious management, which frees the conscious mind to add depth rather than managing structure. This is when you add one advanced protocol to your nightly practice: identity rehearsal, the advanced memory, the coherence practice, or whichever of the chapter 16 through 20 protocols is most relevant to your current life focus. Add only one. The temptation to add several simultaneously is a trap. You cannot deepen multiple new channels at the same time without shallowing all of them. The success marker for Phase 2 is the second of the 3 shift signals from Chapter 13. You notice the loop activating before it runs. You catch it at initiation, not at peak. You are observing the pattern from outside rather than being inside it. Phase 3 runs from days 57 through 90, the integration phase. The goal in Phase 3 is for the pre-sleep state to become your default rather than an achievement. This is the consolidation window for the new neural architecture you have been building. The protocols do not disappear in Phase 3. They consolidate. 5 protocols that previously took 20 to 25 minutes to run now take 5 minutes because the underlying state they were building is already partially present at the start of the sequence. The success marker for Phase 3 is the 3rd shift signal. When you skip a night, you notice. Not because you feel terrible the next day, though you might notice a slight difference, but because something feels unresolved. The practice has become part of the night's closure. Its absence is noticeable in the way the absence of any established routine is noticeable. Here is the 5-minute maintenance practice that I am calling the night close, which is what Phase 3 consolidates into. Clock breath, 4 cycles, approximately 90 seconds. Loop check. Name whatever is active, state the one-word response. Filed, or advanced memory running, or personal timeline, or ledger closed. You are not running the full protocol. You are acknowledging the state and directing it with one word. Somatic anchor, 30 seconds, your anchor word, your physical sensation. 1 forward sentence, I am moving toward blank. Complete it specifically. Then sleep, 5 minutes. That is the maintenance dose for what you have built across 90 days. Chapter 22, The He Environmental Architecture, Your Sleep Space ASACUES1 STEM. Your bedroom is not a neutral space. It is a behavioral environment, and like all behavioral environments, it is either programmed to trigger specific states or it is not. Most people's bedrooms are a collection of incidental cues accumulated over time without intention. The light from a charging cable, the phone on the nightstand, the temperature that varies with the season, the sounds of the building or the street. These are not neutral inputs. They are inputs the nervous system processes and attaches to the experience of being in that space. If your bedroom has been, for years, a space where you bring your phone, your work anxiety, and your social comparison content, then the bedroom itself has become a cue for those states. Walking through the door triggers the same neural patterns associated with the content that has been consumed in that space, because the brain is an associative machine and proximity to the environment reactivates the patterns that have been rehearsed there. The goal of environmental architecture is not decoration. It is deliberate cue replacement. You are systematically changing the inputs so that the environment signals the pre-sleep practice rather than the default loops. Here are the specific variables and the mechanism behind each one. Temperature. The NIH documented optimal range for sleep onset is 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. This is not approximately cool. It is specifically this range. The reason is that sleep onset is associated with a drop in core body temperature. When the external environment is in this range, the body's thermoregulation system can facilitate the temperature drop that signals sleep initiation without working against the environment. A room that is too warm forces the body to work to cool itself rather than simply dropping into the sleep initiation cascade. The target is specific, 65 to 68 Fahrenheit, not 72. Not whatever feels comfortable when you are awake. Light. The blue light discussion has dominated sleep hygiene conversations for a decade, and while blue light is a real variable, it is incomplete as a framework. Total lux, the overall amount of light, matters as much as spectrum. Your target in the bedroom 30 minutes before sleep is below 10 lux. Candlelight runs at approximately 1 lux. A standard overhead LED runs at 300 to 500 lux. The difference is not trivial. Melatonin production, which drives sleep initiation, is suppressed at lux levels above approximately 10 in sensitive individuals and above 100 in most adults. The solution is not blue light glasses. The solution is reducing total light intensity in the sleep environment well before the clock breath begins. Sound. White noise at approximately 65 decibels consistently outperforms silence for adults with high cognitive load during the pre-sleep window. The mechanism is masking. White noise creates a stable auditory field that prevents the sudden intrusive sounds, a car outside, a voice from another room, a notification, from punctuating the corridor and pulling attention back to external vigilance. The critical specification is steady volume. White noise that varies in volume can become a stimulus rather than a mask. Steady, consistent, at approximately 65 decibels. Scent. Lavender, specifically lavender oil with high linalool content, has been documented in controlled trials to reduce pre-sleep cortisol in laboratory conditions. The mechanism involves linalool's interaction with GABA receptors in the olfactory system, producing mild anxiolytic effects. This is not aromatherapy in the vague wellness sense. It is a specific compound, at a specific concentration, applied in a specific way. 2 drops of linalool-rich lavender essential oil on a tissue placed near the pillow, not diffused into the room generally. The proximity matters because olfactory processing is direct and rapid and does not require high concentration to produce the receptor interaction. The phone. The research on this is specific enough to be operationally useful. A 2019 study from Baylor University found that having a phone in another room, not on silent, not face down, not even on airplane mode, but in a physically different room, produced a 34% reduction in self-reported pre-sleep rumination compared to having the phone on the nightstand. The phone on silent on the nightstand produced minimal measurable difference compared to the phone face-up. What the brain appears to respond to is the potential for contact, the possibility of notification, the implicit availability of the device. That possibility alone is cognitively costly. Removing it from the room removes the possibility along with the device. These are not soft suggestions. They are specific, mechanism-grounded environmental inputs that you can change tonight, and that will begin having measurable effects on your corridor quality within the first week. Chapter 23. Sasanal and CY Slackle ADJ US Ment. Chen TN THE Protocol Needs TO Change. One of the most important things to understand about a 90-day behavioral program is that what you are reprogramming is not a static system. You are a person in a life that changes. Your dominant loop is not fixed. it shifts with circumstances. And the protocol that is precisely calibrated to your dominant loop in September may be the wrong tool entirely by February. The recalibration markers are three. First, your loop has shifted. You are running a different default pattern than you were running when you began. Second, your sleep quality has declined after a stable period with no obvious external change. If the current protocol is correct for your current loop and your sleep quality is declining, the most likely explanation is not that the protocol has stopped working. It is that the loop has changed and the protocol is no longer targeting the right pattern. Third, a major life event, even a positive one. A new job, a new relationship, a new city, the arrival of a child, the departure of a child, a significant achievement, a loss. All of these generate new loop types, and sometimes they generate multiple new loops simultaneously. The arrival of a major positive life change can generate forecast loop activity around uncertainty, debt loop activity around whether you deserve the change, and comparison loop activity around whether you are handling it correctly. A major change does not exempt you from the loops. It generates new ones. Recalibration practice, return to Chapter 3 for 3 consecutive nights. Run only the diagnostic. At the end of each night, note your dominant loop. After 3 nights, identify the pattern. Rebuild your protocol stack from the appropriate chapter for the new dominant loop. This is not failure. This is maintenance. You do not continue using last year's prescription when your vision has changed. Charlotte is 55 years old and was widowed 8 months before the period of her life I am describing. For the first several months after her husband's death, her dominant loop was the debt loop. Did I give enough? Did I do enough? Was I present enough in the years we had? She ran the ledger protocol consistently for those months, and it helped. It gave her the evening closure her grief brain was looking for without demanding that she resolve what could not be resolved. 3 months later, the texture of her nights changed. The debt loop was still present, but it was no longer dominant. What had moved to the center was the forecast loop, and specifically the most specific and daunting version of it. How do I navigate a future that has no shape yet? How do I survive alone? What does the next 20 years look like without him? The forecast loop was running the most threatening future simulations her brain could generate, and it was running them with a specificity and vividness that the ledger protocol was not designed to address. When Charlotte recognized the shift, which took about 2 weeks of noting that the ledger was not producing its usual closure, she returned to Chapter 3. She identified the forecast loop as her new dominant pattern. She built the advanced memory protocol for her specific situation, which required some adaptation because the future scenes she had access to were less socially specific than the protocol typically uses. Her husband was gone, and many of her imagined futures had included him. She found, with time, specific scenes of her own competence and groundedness in a future 12 months out. Visiting her daughter, sitting in the reading chair by the window with the specific morning light, being someone who had found a way through. The advanced memory began to work. Shifting protocols when the loop shifts is not a sign that the program is unstable. It is the sign that you have developed enough metacognitive awareness of your own pre-sleep patterns to know when the tool needs to change. Chapter 24. HN Saman N Your Life Disrupts The Practice. The most common reason people abandon a pre-sleep practice is not internal resistance. It is not the extinction burst. It is not the plateau. It is other people. Partners who come to bed 2 hours after you do. Children who wake in the night and need something from you. Roommates whose schedules do not match yours. Urban noise that penetrates regardless of what you do about it. These are real constraints, and a program that pretends they do not exist is a program designed for people who live alone in quiet houses, which is a relatively small subset of the humans who need better sleep. 3 specific scenarios with specific solutions. The first scenario, a partner who comes to bed later or significantly earlier than your target sleep time. The night close corridor is 22 minutes. If your partner's schedule makes that 22-minute window genuinely unavailable, the morning protocol becomes your primary reprogramming window. The hypnopompic state at waking is neurologically equivalent to the hypnagogic state before sleep. It is slightly shorter in its optimal window, approximately 4 to 6 minutes rather than 20, but it is accessible, it is reliable, and it is private. The seal from Chapter 15 can be expanded to include a 3-minute advanced memory or identity rehearsal sequence, making the morning corridor carry the primary installation load. The evening protocol becomes maintenance rather than the primary vehicle. The second scenario, children who interrupt sleep. This is not a problem with a clean solution. But here is what is practically achievable. The 2-cycle clock breath takes approximately 2 minutes. It can be run lying in bed in complete silence and darkness after any interruption, regardless of how disruptive the interruption was. For practitioners who have been running the full protocol for 3 or more weeks, the 2-cycle clock breath is enough to re-access a partial corridor state within 3 to 4 minutes. The trained nervous system responds faster to the signal. The interrupted night becomes a series of short corridors rather than a single extended one. The third scenario, noise and urban environments. The white noise protocol at 65 decibels handles much of this mechanically. What the white noise does not handle, the position and the somatic anchor can partially compensate for. The right side position with hand-on sternum creates a sensory environment that is internally directed rather than externally directed. The anchor, particularly after several weeks of practice, is strong enough to maintain the internal focus even against moderate external noise. The practice becomes portable in the way that any well-established behavioral sequence becomes portable, not because the environment has been eliminated, but because the internal signal is strong enough to compete with it. Paula is 33 years old and is the mother of 3 children under 7, including 1 infant. She practices the night close in a shared bedroom. Her sleep is interrupted between 1 and 4 times per night on average. She has, by any objective measure, one of the more difficult environments for a pre-sleep practice. She described the practice this way: I do the night close in 5 minutes before the baby monitor goes off. And when it goes off, I handle what needs to be handled, and then I lie back down and do 2 cycles of clock breath and say filed, and I go back. It is not the same as a full night of uninterrupted practice, but it is what I have. And what I have is more stabilizing than any amount of time I have spent on wellness apps, which require a peace that does not exist in this season of my life. The practice adapts to the life. It does not require a life that has been cleared for the practice. Chapter 25. The night you do not want to do it, discipline and the minimum viable protocol. Let me be honest with you about something that most programs in this space are not honest about. There will be nights when you do not want to do this. Not, cannot do it. Do not want to. Nights when you are tired in a different way than sleep deprivation. Nights when grief or acute stress or illness or simply the ordinary depletion of a life being fully lived makes the idea of running a protocol feel like one more demand on a system that has already given everything it has to give. And the worst thing a protocol can do in that moment is demand full execution. Because if full execution is the standard, then falling short of full execution produces guilt. Guilt in the pre-sleep window is cortisol. Cortisol disrupts the corridor. You are now worse off than if you had done nothing, and the practice itself has become a source of the anxiety it was designed to address. The principle underlying the minimum viable protocol is this: the night practice is not a productivity system. It is a nervous system signal. The goal of the signal is not maximum intensity. The goal is consistency. A small signal sent every night is more neurologically effective than a large signal sent 5 nights out of 7. The nervous system learns from pattern. Pattern requires repetition. Repetition requires that the entry point for the protocol on a difficult night be achievable. Here is the minimum viable protocol. It takes 3 minutes. It can be run from any starting point, including acute distress, including illness, including grief. 1 clock breath cycle. 1 repetition of the 4-count inhale, 7-count hold, 8-count exhale. 30 seconds. 1 loop name. Whatever is running, name it. Say it internally. Then say the word filed. Not because the loop is resolved, because you have acknowledged it and you are signaling the close. 10 seconds. 1 sentence. Tomorrow I continue. 5 seconds. That is the minimum viable protocol. That is enough. Not enough to produce the full depth of encoding that the complete protocol produces. Enough to maintain the pattern. Enough to send the signal. Enough to keep the thread alive through the difficult nights, so that when the difficult nights pass, and they do pass, you pick up not from the beginning but from where you were. The night practice is not a performance. It is a nervous system ritual. Rituals do not require excellence. They require presence. Even minimal presence is presence. Chapter 26. Tracking Withut OBS USSian THE right metrics. There is a real risk built into any self-monitoring practice, and it is the risk that the act of monitoring becomes its own anxiety loop. The health loop. Am I sleeping well enough? Is my HRV within normal range? Did I get enough deep sleep? Am I tracking correctly? These are real concerns that the quantified self movement has generated in a subset of its practitioners. The wearable device purchased to improve sleep becomes a source of new pre-sleep anxiety about whether tonight's data will confirm that the practice is working. The solution is not to abandon tracking. It is to track only what produces useful signal and to review that signal at a cadence that prevents it from becoming a performance metric rather than a diagnostic tool. What to track? 4 variables. Sleep onset time as a subjective estimate within 10 minutes of accuracy is sufficient. You do not need a wearable to do this. You note the time you lie down. You note the time you estimate you fell asleep in the morning. The difference is your onset time. Morning loop orientation, which is one word, forward or backward. Was your first morning thought forward-looking or backward-scanning? Body state on waking, one word, tight or loose, heavy or light. An active loop from the previous night, named inventory, forecast, comparison, or debt. Those are your 4 data points. They take approximately 90 seconds to record each morning. They give you everything you need for the weekly review. What not to track? Sleep stages, because the wearable estimates of sleep stages are plus or minus 35% accurate compared to laboratory polysomnography, which means they are telling you something, but not what they appear to be telling you with precision. REM duration, for the same reason. Detailed dream content, because extended dream analysis during the first 30 days tends to drift toward interpretation rather than diagnostic tracking, which is the domain of trained clinical work and not what the morning note is designed for. And any metric that you find yourself checking compulsively during the day, because compulsive checking is a new loop being generated by the tracking itself. Review cadence. Weekly, not daily. Sunday morning, 5 minutes. Reread the previous 7 days of morning notes. Look for pattern shift, not daily performance. Are the loop names changing? Is the morning orientation trending forward? Is the onset time trending shorter? Those are the signals. Any single night is noise. 7 nights is pattern. One specific caution about wearables. If you find yourself checking your sleep score before you have fully registered how you actually feel in your own body, the wearable has become a source of external authority over your internal experience. The device cannot measure your subjective experience of recovery. Only you can. The device is a rough proxy. Your actual felt sense of your morning state is the primary data. Trust it. Chapter 27. The practice beyond sleep, living the DAF from the night. Something happens at approximately the 90-day mark that is consistently reported by people who have run a practice like this one, and that was not directly targeted by the protocol. Their waking state changes. Not their sleep, their waking state. The quality of their presence in ordinary moments, the speed with which they return to center after disruption, the capacity to observe their own mental patterns while inside them rather than only recognizing patterns after the fact. These changes are not side effects. They are the direct downstream effects of what the practice has been training. The mechanism is metacognition. Every time you name a loop before sleep, you are practicing the act of observing a mental process rather than being consumed by it. Every time you say forecast loop, filed, and redirect to the advanced memory, you are rehearsing the cognitive operation of stepping outside a running pattern and choosing a different direction. This operation does not switch off at sunrise. The same neural capacity that you have been training in the dark, lying in bed, 22 minutes before sleep, is the capacity that becomes available to you in the middle of a difficult conversation, in the middle of a moment of triggered anxiety, in the middle of any experience that would previously have had you fully inside it with no observational distance. Mabel is 62 years old, retired, and has been running a version of this practice for 6 months. She does not talk about her sleep when she describes what has changed. She talks about her days, She says, "I catch myself mid-sentence now when I am running the comparison loop in a conversation. I can feel it activating. I hear the tone in my own voice shift, and I can see it." I did not have that before the practice. Before, the loop just ran and I was in it. Now I can see it while it is running, and seeing it changes it. Not always, but often enough that I am a different person in those moments than I was before. This is not a metaphysical claim. This is the documented effect of sustained metacognitive training. The ability to observe your own mental processes from a slight distance, to see the pattern while being inside the experience, is a trainable skill. And the most consistent training environment for it is the one that is available to you every night, without equipment, without cost, in the 22 minutes before you close your eyes. The night practice is not about sleeping better. Sleeping better is the mechanism through which everything else improves. The night practice is about building, one night at a time, the observational capacity that turns your experience from something that happens to you into something you are increasingly participating in. The final instruction of this program is not an instruction about sleep. It is an instruction about what to ask yourself tonight, after your night close, in the last moments of the corridor before sleep takes you. Ask yourself this: what am I becoming? Do not answer it. Do not try to answer it. Simply let the question sit in the corridor the way Edison let his problems sit in the threshold state, handed over, not pursued. You will notice, across the weeks and months that follow, that your answer changes. Not because you thought harder about it, because the night has been working while you rested, because the corridor has been open every night, whether you knew it or not, and now you know it, and now you know what to send through it. The rest is repetition, not repetition of effort, repetition of presence. Daichi morning after everything. Let us return to Sarah. Same woman, same bed, same city, same job, same night, but different. She pulls back the covers. She lies down. Her mind reaches, out of habit, for the daily audit. It arrives. The meeting, the email, the unfinished report. She does not push it away. She does not tell herself not to think these things. She lets them surface. And then, without drama, without effort, she names them. She runs the filing method. She gives each item one next action. She says filed. She feels, physically, the sensation of setting something down. The inventory loop runs for 4 minutes. Then it closes. She runs 4 clock breath cycles. In the dark, on her right side, hand on sternum. 4 counts in. 7 counts hold. 8 counts out. The corridor opens. She runs her advanced memory. The coffee shop on the corner near her office. 3 months from now. A message from the partner firm that says the engagement has been approved. The weight of the ceramic cup in her hand. The way the light comes through the window in the afternoon. She runs the scene at medium zoom. Then close zoom. Then she says, without fanfare, I have already been here. She holds her somatic anchor, the word that belongs to her. The memory of a specific moment of capability that lives in her body before it lives in her mind. 30 seconds, maybe 90. She is asleep, by her own estimate, in approximately 13 minutes. Her dreams tonight are not perfect. They are not pure resolution, but they are more narratively coherent than they were 6 weeks ago. She is more often the protagonist. The tension in the dream more often moves. She has been tracking this, 2 sentences each morning, and she has seen the shift. Her morning note tomorrow will say, forward. The first thought was forward. This is not transformation. The word transformation implies that Sarah has become a different person. She has not become a different person. She has become a person who runs different default patterns in the 20 minutes before sleep. That distinction matters because it is honest about what this program does and does not do. It does not remove the hard things from your life. It does not resolve the meeting or fix the email or finish the report. It does not give you a life that does not require courage or persistence or the capacity to endure difficulty. What it does is change what your brain encodes as instruction in the hours when you are most open to encoding. It changes the direction the corridor faces so that what walks through it every night is something you have chosen rather than something that loaded by default. Reprogramming is slower than transformation mythology suggests and faster than resignation implies. Most people who do this for 90 nights, with the protocols, through the extinction burst and through the plateau and into the integration phase, report that the change arrived gradually and then all at once, the way Trudy described standing in front of the bridge that appeared to have been built overnight. David. Day 12. He woke up early, before anyone else in his house. He made coffee. He sat in the kitchen in the quiet of early morning with a mug he liked and a notebook he had been keeping for the program. He had been tracking his morning anxiety ratings at his therapist's suggestion. The average before the program had been 7.4 out of 10. This morning, he looked at the number he had written, and it was 3.1. He had not written that number in months. He wrote in his log that day, "I do not feel different. I feel earlier. Like I got somewhere slightly before I expected to. That is the most accurate description I have encountered of what this practice produces. Not a different destination. An earlier arrival. Not a transformed self. A self who got there first. Who had, in the corridor, already been where the day was asking him to go. The corridor opens again tonight. You know what it is now. You know when it opens. You know what to send through it. You know the 4 loops and how to file them. You know the clock breath and what it does to the frequency of your brain. You know the somatic anchor and why words are only half the signal. You know what the extinction burst means and what the plateau means and what the quiet shift means and how to recognize each one. You know the morning corridor and how to seal the night's work into the beginning of the day. The rest is repetition. Not repetition of effort. Not grinding. Not forcing. Repetition of presence. Showing up to the 22-minute window with the knowledge of what it is and the willingness to use it as it was designed to be used. Begin tonight. Not tomorrow, which is what the part of you that is still running the forecast loop will suggest. Not when things settle down, which is what the part of you that is running the debt loop will offer as an excuse. Tonight. In this bed, in this body, with the life you actually have. The corridor is open. You know the way. The practice is simply remembering that.